Good. All right, good evening. It is April 12th of 2022, and we're talking about insect pests in turf. And so these are the main offenders that we see in our lawns here in central and western Nebraska. You will also see these in eastern Nebraska as well. These are the main ones that are the most problematic. We'll talk about the different pieces to each of those pests, their life cycle, and how to treat those. And we will talk about some IPM, some integrated pest management right off the bat, and we will go from there. So our objectives are very easy. We want to be able to identify the common insect pests. We will understand their life cycles and then learn some strategies for control. And why do we care? Because everyone wants a beautiful lawn. And while I put that as right up on top on the first, we need to have a greater focus for the health of the lawn, not just the looks. We need a good, healthy lawn, and a good, healthy lawn is not going to look totally perfect all the time, but it's still going to be healthy. And we want to be able to find a way to make decisions on ways to avoid these infestations of these common offenders. And we also have the loss of turf, where the turf grass dies out. We also have a loss of precious time. We have a loss of resources when we have to go through and make rescue treatments just trying to stop a big problem, and the money. So time and money are probably the biggest things that really scare people, because it's the amount of time to go treat these things, and time is money. And maybe your time is more valuable than money at this point. But we lose out the turf. It doesn't have the appearance that we like. And we're extra applying resources that we shouldn't have had to apply if we were taking care of the turf correctly in the first place. Now, there are times when there are things that we just simply cannot avoid. And that's when we have to do some of these treatments. But I want you to understand the biology and the specifics of each of these pests. So when we talk about integrated pest management, or IPM, and we hear IPM used very loosely when we interpret what that means. And so when we look at IPM, some important things that we need to know before we even start is we need the correct identification of the problem first. If we get the wrong ID, then we are giving out the wrong recommendation. We're giving out the wrong recommendation. We're giving out the wrong potential product being used, or the wrong scouting methods. And that sends us down a different path that's not going to help us. So we have to know the idea of the pest first. We need to know the life cycle and what's going to happen in the life cycle and what to look for. We're going to talk about the control options, and then we're going to talk about correct timing and application, because timing and application are so critical to actually getting the job done. So we can't just decide, oh, it's Saturday, I'm going to go do this. We need to do the application correctly at the right time. So always remember, and this is also before we start any of this, that a healthy turf, a healthy lawn controls pests. Where we have a thick and dense stand of grass that is healthy, that not needing any rescue treatments or any extra insecticides. We avoid over-fertilization, because one of these pests does like over-fertilized lawns or overuse of pesticides, and appropriate water application. Find what the turf really needs instead of just turning on that sprinkler system and letting it go the entire year, whether it needs it or not. So here are the main offenders. The white grubs, and we have lots of relatives. They are all beetles, billbugs, armyworms, chinch bugs, and the sod webworm. Okay, so let's talk about the white grubs. They're all relatives. They're all types of scarab type beetles. They damage all types of turf. They are a C-shaped white larva with brown heads. They develop in what we call an instar, which are developmental stages where they will grow from the smallest to the largest stage. Your largest stage, largest instar, is when they are closest to the surface of the soil, where they are chewing on plant roots and killing plants off and causing damage. So we always have to remember that we're trying to catch these either preventatively as a systemic product or as a rescue treatment when they're actively feeding. And we talk about that third final instar is when they're damaging. So that's really important. Your handouts will and your presentation will have a lot of links in here to different publications, and you can go back to those and reference them. So here is our fun grub. And this is more than just the June beetle. The June beetle has its relatives, and we will talk about that. And its very distinctive body pattern is in the shape of the letter C, and it has a brown head. And as it grows and goes through an instars, it will grow bigger and bigger, and it'll grow closer to and develop closer to the soil surface where it's going to chew the roots and kill off grass plants. And then it'll go through the last stage and then become a beetle and will come out of the ground. So what's important on these grubs are their rear ends, because the rear end or the raster is what we use to identify which type of grub we have, because there are different types of grubs. And here's a picture of the different rasters or the rear ends of these insects, these insect larvae. And so it's very important to know that they are different. So you have the Japanese beetle on your upper left-hand corner. That's a creamy white, and it's got these fine little reddish golden hairs on the back end. And that looks different than the common May-June beetle on your bottom right. It's white, but do you see the V shape that's in here? So I'm going to take my highlighter, my laser pointer here. See, this makes a V shape. That helps us identify that larva as a May-June beetle. The other one that will have that V shape is not as, it's more pronounced, is the Schaefer. This is the European Schaefer. It's got the cream kind of color, but it's also got this V up here that's different than your May-June beetle. Our other main offender is your masked Schaefer. Your masked Schaefer has a dark abdomen on the rear end, and the rasters don't look as fine. So who thought you would ever look at the rear end of a grub to find out what it is? So this is an easy way to identify. If you can match up the pictures to what you're looking at, you can tell what that will turn into as an adult. So here are your adults. Here are your 4 big offenders. This is one we see all the time, the old June bug that goes buzzing around the lights in the summer. What they're going to do is they're going to emerge out of the soil, and they're going to feed on plant materials, and they're going to lay eggs. And if you've ever squished a June beetle, You'll see that big old mass of white eggs that looks like tapioca pudding. Those are egg masses. They produce lots of eggs. And they all do. All four of these do. You have your southern masked Schaefer that comes later in the summer, and it's kind of got this mask here that's real dark. That's why we call this one the masked Schaefer, I guess, kind of like Zorro maybe. Then we have the green June bug, green June beetle. And so it has the metallic emerald green to it. And yes, it will feed on things not as obvious or as high in numbers, but it will develop and it will feed on it. And now, since we have Japanese beetles in western Nebraska, they come out, they're all voracious eaters. They eat on plant materials. And what's identifying with the Japanese beetles are these white tufts along the side of the abdomen, lower abdomen. That tells you that you've got a Japanese beetle. So those are four really quick pictures of the adults that do most of the damage that fall under our grub category. And then here is a really good diagram. This is also from Purdue University, from that publication that talks about the development stages of these grubs and when they overwinter. So they're going to overwinter deeper in the soil in the winter. And as they grow and grow through those instars, as the soil warms up, they're going to get closer to that soil level. And that's when they're going to start chewing off the roots of the grass. And the grass is going to start dying in patches. And you will see then they go through that final grub stage. They're going to go through metamorphosis, and they are going to emerge out as an adult. And then they're going to lay eggs, lay their eggs, that tapioca mass of egg mass, and then they're going to hatch, and then they're going to grow, and then they're going to rescind back down for the winter. So that is the pattern of what they do in a year's time. And basically the time when the yellow is when we see the damage, because as those roots are chewed off in the spring, then it gets hot and then it gets dry and you don't have roots. So things start dying off. That's when you see the damage. And so we talk about strategies 1, 2, and 3 in here, and we'll get to those in a minute on what you can do. Here is a picture of a golf course fairway, which what happens is that they're out feeding. And if there's enough of them in an area concentrated, that they can do some severe damage where you will obviously see the problem. And this does not go over well in high expectation grounds, such as a golf course or someone's very high expectation lawn, because people don't like that. And so they do cause a lot of trouble. So what you can do in those areas is you would start sampling the sod. And this is one of those things. Here's a picture of a damaged area where you cut the sod and you open it up and look, and you can start counting the grubs. And usually in that square area, if you can count 8 or more, that's usually an idea that we need to do some treatment. But you will see right there, right under the soil level, you can see where the roots have been and where they've been chewing. So that's really important. The next picture is a common picture of the green June bug, of its grub, and it kind of forces its way up a little bit. So it's different than the other beetles, but it will force its way up and out, a little bit of mounding appearance. So that is one way that you may think you have a green June bug instead of some of the others. And then this is a real problem, especially during a drought season, are damage from vertebrates, including our raccoons and our skunks. And they will pick apart the lawn looking for something to eat, especially in drought areas. So if you live on a farmstead and there's been a real drought, you will see these fun friends come in at night and they'll be digging up and peeling back or literally roughing up your lawn, and they will, or the grass around outbuildings, literally eating those grubs up because they're starved. There's a lack of moisture and their food source is scant. So that's one thing to remember is when you see this, that means there's raccoons and skunks been out and about chewing on things. So that's the question. So now, since we've seen what the damage can do, now we're going to talk about what you do with treating them. So our next question is the strategy. So strategy one, this is working with your high-end landscapes that need that treatment early. You're sampling and you find out that you have a continuous problem in an area. So strategy one is using a systemic insecticide that you're applying to the granule onto the lawn, which can be granular or liquid, depending on the product. And it's a broad window. It'll catch a broad window starting in May and June, where the eggs are being laid. And as they hatch, as they feed, then they're going to get a dose of the toxin and they're smoked. So this is one of the things that if we have a persisting problem that we have to get rid of, or we have a very high expectation lawn, or if we have a golf course where members are expecting a very nice golf course to play golf on, this is one strategy that is commonly used. So the next one is one that is more towards the homeowner, the general homeowner in late May, early June, where we know that we have had a high infestation in the past and we're going to treat it. And we apply before we see any damage. So we're going to use this as a preventative. This is that systemic product. And we're going to sample areas for those threshold numbers before we apply it. You will always have some type of grub population in the lawn. So when someone says, I've got grubs in my lawn, it's best to do some checkings like how many do you have in a square foot area? That's always good to know because you'll never get rid of all of them, but you've got to get the population knocked down to the point where you don't see those horrible patches showing up. And then the last one is what we call the rescue treatment. This is in June. This is in later June, July, August, where you are literally applying a contact product. You're putting that down into the grass, into the lawn. It's going to be absorbed. You're going to water it in, and it's going to hammer what's present. It has no residual activity where it hangs on. So you're going to apply it and you hope that it smokes them out. You may have to apply it maybe 2 weeks later for another application. So that's the difference between using a systemic where it's sitting in the plant roots as they chew, they get a dose of the toxin, they're smoked, versus waiting a little longer, testing the area and treating it with a systemic versus, hey, it's July, I'm just going to put the stuff down. And so these are the common chemical products that we use. And the top two are the systemics. And the first one is imidacloprid. This is a very common systemic insecticide. And the trade name is Merit. Very common. The other one is halofentanide, and that's called Mach 2. So if you see products that have imidacloprid or halofentanide on your active ingredient label, that's the product. Those are your systemics. So that works out pretty good. You may see literally a bag of Merit, or you will have a weed and feed that contains Merit or contains Mach 2. As a combination product. And so we're going to apply that in early June, late May, and that usually gives us summer-long control. Sometimes we will see southern mass Schaefer damage in September, so that's something to think about. But unless you know you have that creature out there wandering around and doing damage in September in high enough numbers, maybe don't have to worry about that one as much. The carbaryl, which is the chemical name for 7 is the trade name, or Dilox is a product. Both of those are the rescue treatments that you put on in July. So those are the grubs. Those are the common critters, the ones that are the biggest offenders. Now we're going to delve into a couple more behind that we will also see, that you will also get questions about. So we're going to talk about bill bugs next. And bill bugs are kind of interesting creatures because they leave damage that is misidentified as something else. And so that's where ID is really important, to know exactly whether we have bill bugs or not, and then how we can get them controlled. So bill bugs damage Kentucky bluegrass and zoysia. Kentucky bluegrass is a cool season turf, meaning it greens up early in the spring, it maintains itself during the summer, and then greens back up in the fall, going into the fall. Zoysia grass, on the other hand, is a warm season, meaning it is going to stay dormant until it gets hot, then it will green up, and then it will go dormant again in the fall or late summer again. Bill bug damage is often identified with drought or another insect type of pest problem because of the way it feeds. And it leaves spotty dead patches, and the stems are break at the crown level. So some people will think you may have a drought problem or you may have a disease problem when you actually have bill bugs. And so it is kind of an interesting creature to look at. And so what they do is they hollow out leaf stems. And what they do is, as the adults grow, they literally will punch a hole in the leaf stem. They're very small. They'll punch a hole in the leaf stem. They'll lay eggs. The eggs hatch. The larvae go down in the grass blade. And as they grow and develop, they're going to leave frass or manure behind. So insect manure. So it's frass, it's brown in color. And they're going to go down to the crown of the plant and they're going to break the crown off. So that's what's different about them. They are very, very small. So they're not big at all. So they lay the eggs in the leaf blades where they have chewed a hole and punched the hole in, and they'll travel down, and they're small in size. The adults are about 1/4 inch in size. So you can imagine what the young ones look like. They're found in June and July during peak season, where they're really going after it, and you'll start to see the damage because they're breaking off the crowns. And so you'll start to see spots in your yard, kind of irregular ones all over the place. So it's best to scout for these rascals in April. So now is a time to be checking for bill bugs. So to scout for your bill bug, if you can go either at your hardware store or your garden center or your Menards, Home Depot, Lowe's, buy some pyrethrins, and it's the low percentage pyrethrin concentrate, and you mix it in 1 gallon of water. And then you flush 1 square foot area with that mix. So you mix it up and you measure out a square foot, and you're going to put down an entire gallon of water in that area. And the pyrethrins really annoy the bill bugs, and the bill bugs come up to the surface. And then you can kind of count. And then you need to wait about 15 minutes for any bill bugs to emerge up to the soil surface. And then for chemical control, we need to use something like Merit, once again, or 7. So Merit 75 WP, that's called a wettable powder. So you would put a powder and mix it in with the water, or your 7, your granules. So either way will work, and we'll smoke them. And here's some pictures of what that damage looks like. Where it's just spotty here and there, because you'll see the crowns of the plant that weren't killed. The crowns of healthy plants are still alive. The crowns of the billbug damaged plants are done because they chewed them off. So some pictures from Ohio State Extension. And so this is what the life cycle looks like. So they do look somewhat like a grub, but they don't have legs. Grubs have 3 pairs of legs. So you need to remember that. So always look to see if they have legs, and then they're going to develop, and they have a very interesting snout on the billbug. And so there's these brown guys, and they've got the stripes, the brownish black stripes. The thorax has some black on it. And then you have that snout that's really easy to identify. That is a billbug. It's only about 1/4 of an inch, so not very big. So that's good to know about that critter. Those products break down very, very fast, especially 7. So someone asked if either of those chemicals are bee friendly. And the nice thing about the fact that we're working with turf grass is we don't have something that necessarily blooms or has that has pollen. So that will work, that bees are not going to go after that or anything in the order Hymenoptera, so bees, wasps, for instance. But this is when you have a problem. So do the scouting first. If you don't have a scouting problem for billbugs, or you don't see any type of damage like that, I wouldn't worry about it. But it's important to know what that damage looks like, and this is how you would check it out and do the test and see what happens. But 7 breaks down very, very fast, especially, and it's relatively inexpensive.
Is that merit that used on the grub same as the billbug?
Yes, the question is on the merit, is that the same as you use on the billbugs? And the answer is yes. So if you're applying down merit for some grubs, you might accidentally knock out a whole bunch of billbugs in the process. But remember, people don't all do the same thing when it comes to their pest control in their lawns. So always something to think about. The next one got our attention last year, the armyworm. And this is very applicable to rural areas where we live. Very, very common, especially if we have cornfields next to us or we live in a small area, small community on the edge of town, and they can come marching on in. And so we see them do their damage. You will see lots of references to armyworms in the South because they are very damaging to hay and forages as well as crops. So it's a pest that does not make it through our winters, thank goodness. But here we go. Armyworms damage all of our types of turf grass that we would have in our lawns. They are susceptible to cold winters, so they die off, thankfully. They have activity in late summer and early fall, and usually they're going to march, so it seems like you have a little army marching across your lawn of all these larvae marching, but could be armyworm. And so they're going from a field to a lawn, or they're going from a damaged lawn to a healthier lawn to feed off of. And so they're going to feed, and as they feed, they will pupate into adults. So that's what they're trying to do. And they're going to defoliate the turf grass. They're going to expose the crowns, and then those crowns are going to dehydrate and dry out. And so this is from an article that Kelly Feehan, my colleague in Columbus, wrote. And so I'm sharing the information that she has put together. The adults are moths, and they are dark gray with light and dark patches on the forewings. The females lay tan-colored egg masses, and they're about 100 to 500 eggs in a mass. And you can find them on trees and flowers. So as you look and you see these light tan egg masses in different places, that could be armyworms. And the new larvae are green. They're green in color, and they make a looping motion when they move around. So if they try to loop around and they're little green larvae, you might have armyworms. And as they grow, they get to be about 1.5 inches long, green to dark green, almost black, and they have stripes on their bodies. And they're pretty noticeable. And when you see a number of them moving along, you really get the impression of the army, the little soldiers marching across your yard. And so here's some scouting tips for the armyworm. Beware those tan-colored egg masses that you find on trees and flowers in the landscape, because the adults are going to lay those eggs. And you'll watch for those younger and those older larvae in the lawn as they migrate in late summer, early fall. And so if you have adjacent cornfields, or if you're on the edge of town, you will start to see them come in. And the granular treatments are very simple products. 7, which is carbaryl. There's permethrins, which are very common, very low toxic dose. Spinosad, Dilox, any of those work great. And those are granulars, you just simply water in. And those are on contact, so as that product gets in contact with those larvae, remember, larvae do not have an exoskeleton, and so they're easily controlled. They're zapped pretty quick. So here's a picture of the adult. This is in the crown of a lawn in the thatch layer. This was taken from an article from Texas A&M University, and you will see the spots. You'll see the dark spots on the wings. So it tells you a little bit about them. They're kind of straw colored, and then they have those loops with those dark spots. And then you have the mass. So it's kind of this cream tan color mass that you will see on leaves, and they will hatch, and they hatch very soon after they're laid. And so you'll start to see activity like this. You'll start to see larvae. So they're out there. We can see at least 4, 5, 6 in this picture really quick in this picture as they're feeding and doing their damage. And then here is an up close picture of the larva in its full glory with the stripes. It does have some hairs on its back. It has a dark head, and it can be from green, shades of green, all the way down to almost looks pitch black. And then this is a picture of what it can do. Just literally strips everything out as they march along. Okay, we have a question in the room.
Are these what we call Miller bugs?
They're similar to, the question is, are these similar to Miller's? And they're similar. Those are corn cutworms. So yeah, that would be another larva that would be, they're moving in the summer and they lay their eggs and they do the hatching. So
They don't damage the lawns.
not very much,
They come
no.
in your house.
They come in your house and are an annoyance, but these are from the cornfields, but they're also in pastures. And so you'll see fall armyworm. This is an article from Mississippi State University. So notice in the deep south, they persist in the fall. So you've got to watch your hay fields as well and what they will do to a hay field, but they literally are just wreaking havoc on you. But we see them in late summer, early fall, kind of a short time, couple weeks, 3 weeks, and they're very easy to control, but they literally look like they're invading the yard when they move across. Our next friend is the chinch bug. And some of you probably know what a chinch bug is, but we do see them in lawns. They are very common in acreages. They're very common in small communities. They're very common in small towns, and they will show up and they will do their damage. And they're kind of interesting. They are orange brick color with a white band around their back. They're a nymph. So a nymph literally looks like a small chinch bug, and it just keeps on developing until you get to the adult. The adult is 3/16 inch long, and it is black, and it has small wings. They emerge in May, and the generation emerges again in July and August. And so you will start to see damage usually in June. And it's very hot when the heat comes out because they've been doing their damage, and they leave their telltale signs. So damage is usually most severe against sidewalks and driveways and full sun where there's a heat source. So they do their damage, and then when it gets hot, the first things that get hot, that's where you'll start to see the damage. So these creatures are very interesting in the sense that they are sap feeders. They don't necessarily chew or damage the plant per se on like chewing and physically eating, but they are ones that have a mouth part that sucks the juice out of the leaves. And they leave a toxin that shuts down water and nutrient movement in the grass blades. So that's why you have that drying up. And of course, against concrete, when it gets hot, that drying up will express itself very easy. It's almost like it's perfect angled lines where there's been chinch bug damage because they've been feeding and that area dries out the quickest, or you have a bright sunny spot where there's a whole bunch of them. And so they will start damage small yellow or damaged brown areas. And the damage also tends to have an orange tinge, which is another kind of telltale sign about these creatures. And I have a life cycle picture of them where you have an egg and they will hatch into a nymph, and the nymph is just a little bit bigger version. It keeps on getting a little bit bigger and through the instar stage until they grow up to an adult. And so this is a publication from the University of Georgia. So they see this problem fairly often down there. They love the heat and the humidity. They love sucking the juice out of those plant leaves and then cause a problem. And so here's a color picture of what a nymph starts out as. And that first instar clear to your left and moves all the way until you have an adult clear on the right, and it has that white on those wings. And those legs do kind of look kind of orangish gold against the black. So once you've seen them, you can tell. And the segmented antenna at the very tips are black. So that's kind of interesting. And here is a picture of what chinch bug damage looks like. So here you go. Here's your pavement. And that area, you notice that's pretty darn dry. So they fed, and that got hot. And so it dried out because water and nutrients cannot move around because that toxin is in the leaf blades. That's when you start to see the chinch bug damage. This is a article from North Carolina State Extension. But we do see the chinch bugs here. We're in an agricultural community. They come in to our towns, and we will see chinch bugs show up. And you will see them, but you have to see enough of them to do their job, to do the damage to really warrant treating them. They're out there feeding, but it's when you have enough of them in a sampling space where you would want to treat them. And so here's what you do on the sampling. So you take a large can, you can take a coffee can, works perfectly fine, open both ends, and you're going to shove that coffee can down into the ground where you think there's damage. And you're going to go a couple inches deep into the soil, and you're going to fill it with water, and you're going to let everything bubble up to the top, let it set for a couple minutes, and your chinch bugs will float to the top. And if you have 15 or more chinch bugs, whether they're the first instar clear up to the adult, no matter what stage they're in, if you got 15 of them, that's basically your threshold for treatment. Loosely. So this is a simple, non-chemical way of testing to see if you have chinch bugs. Shove the can in the ground, fill it up with water, see what floats to the top, see if you have any of those nymphs or adults in there, and do your counting. So that's a good way to test. And here's a picture of that being done. This is from that Georgia publication It was a picture from Texas A&M that they borrowed, and you can tell that this is a coffee can shoved halfway down into the ground, and you can see. And so you would, after the water fills up and everything floats to the top, skim everything off and start counting how many chinch bugs are in there. So a very simple MacGyver-like way to test. And so we're going to test, we're going to do granular treatments are not the choice for chinch bugs. That's not very effective. Liquid insecticides are much more effective on the chinch bugs. So that's one you really need to think about using liquid if you have them. And so the insecticides, there's a whole bunch of them that can be used. It has to include one of these active ingredients. So permethrin, bifenthrin, lambda, cylohalothrin, or cyfluflin are active ingredients that are effective for controlling chinch bugs. And you will see things for lawn insect pests. And if you see something that's labeled for chinch bugs that has one of these products, that's a liquid, you can use it, follow the label instructions, and that helps get rid of the problem. And then we have the wonderful sod webworm, which is really in its own weird way kind of interesting as well. The sod webworm will damage and will start with small irregular brown patches. People might think they have brown patch in their lawn, but when you look closer, when you get on your hands and knees, you will see that the grass blades are literally chewed down to the soil surface. So they've taken out the crown and you're down to just bare ground. They're literally just the stubs left from that sod webworm working. And this is different from the armyworm. And the damage is usually seen in summers when the population peaks. So you may see a problem one summer and you may not the next. So they kind of go in cycles when the population builds up. When a population builds up is when you see the damage and when you need to treat. And then you can go away from it if you don't have a problem again. So don't be caught into the trap of just because someone offers a surface to kill the insects. If you don't have the insect problem, don't buy the product or don't buy the surface, the service to try to kill it, because that's just putting empty product onto something that's probably not even there that warrants treatment. So the lawns are usually the most susceptible are ones that are drought stressed. They're new, so they're establishing themselves, and golf courses that are highly fertilized. And highly fertilized lawns are big targets. So anything that's new, that's establishing itself, anything that's overfed, which we have a number of lawns that are overfed that we hear about, and then the ones that are in drought stress. So it doesn't pay to over fertilize for multiple reasons, but it also in this case have a problem with tall fescue grass and with sod webworm. It's because tall fescue has an endophyte. It contains an endophyte in its chemistry that is toxic to sod webworms. So they will not be present in any sizable number at all in a tall fescue lawn. So that's one thing that you can look for and probably be able to rule out. It will feed on Kentucky blue, though. So remember, tall fescue is also a cool season lawn like our bluegrass that greens up in the spring and then it kind of holds itself. We try to keep it hydrated because it's one that we have to hydrate and keep going during the dog days of summer and then greens up in the fall. But the adults are these tubular shaped moths that are buff color. And if you have a bunch of sod webworm adults, you literally will walk through the lawn and you'll see all these little moths fly up, these little tubular guys. Looks like little sticks or like grass blades. And so the larvae are an inch long and they are gray with brown spots and segments, but they're really tan in appearance. And they have these larvae that hide in these silken circles and holes in the ground. And so they'll have the circle shape, and they have this silken material that the larva will hide in. And they're like a pencil-sized tube in the lawn. So that's another giveaway that helps us identify this pest. And here is a picture of their cycle where you have an egg, and then you have the larva, and they do not have legs, and they will start to grow some appendages along. They're not legs, but they're little pointies, fine hairs, and then they will pupate and turn into an adult. And that publication, another publication from the University of Georgia on turf grass. So here it is. And here's our article on sod webworm from UNL. And so that is an up-close picture of what the adult looks like. And it's very tubular in shape. It almost looks like a small grass blade. And when you walk up, you'll see a little cloud float up. If you see a cloud of these come up, you need to be treating. They're a problem, because when they feed, they really literally mow you literally down to the base, chew down the crown, cause all kinds of problems. But the adults have these interesting dots on their segments. Looks like 4 dots, black dots. And so that's a picture of what the adult will look like. And then it'll pupate and it'll turn into the moth that will lay the eggs. And then here is a picture of those pencil-shaped holes. And it's like they've roughed everything up real good. And then you'll see those holes, and they kind of have that silken material in there. And that tells you it is sod webworm. So how do we test for these creatures? So it's a very simple test again. You can use pyrethrins, or you can mix a 1/4 cup of dish detergent and 2 gallons of water together, swish it all together really well. You mark off a square foot area where you think there's damage, where you look and you see that there's a lot of damage down where the grass is chewed down to the soil surface. You apply 1 gallon of solution in 1 square foot area, wait 5 to 10 minutes, and start counting the larvae that float up to the surface, because the pyrethrins or the soap, the detergent, really bothers the larva. So it's an annoying factor, and they'll come right up. So for treatment, we are going to look for, if we have 15 or more, we definitely have a problem. We want to get those treated. So what you do is you're going to need to mow the lawn first, and you're going to remove the clippings. This is one time I can tell you, remove the clippings out, because you want a good contact and get everything knocked out. You're going to start your irrigation system, and you're going to apply a 1/2 inch or a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of irrigation to the treatment area before you put on product. And then in late afternoon or evening, you start to apply. And so the products that you can use contain spinosad as an active ingredient, acephate, which is another one, carbaryl, which is 7, or synthetic pyrethroids. Any of those, we see all of those products available in hardware stores, garden centers, or your retail centers. And you apply that, and then after you apply, you put a very light application of irrigation water on top to help dissolve the product in and get it taken care of. So that's the sod webworm. They have those cool holes. It looks like someone put a pencil in the ground. It looks like there's silk in those tunnels, and that helps you. But the soap will be an irritant, and they pop right up for you, and you can literally count them. So here are the references from the different publications that I used. Some of those are on the website that I posted for you. And so you can look at them, and there's some good information above and beyond what I have taught in tonight's presentation. But I wanted to pick the best things out from each of them and show you, so you can go back and look for them. And if you have questions, I can help you find those. But my information, and so we're just talking about these quick and dirty, very common pests that cause us so much problems. So that is the end of the slideshow, and I'm going to stop share and ask, do we have any questions? Remember, we hope we never have to be to this point where we have to do a chemical treatment. Because remember, if we have a healthy lawn with a healthy stand of grass that we don't over fertilize and we give the adequate irrigation we need that we covered in the water dogs class last week, that helps us avoid these problems. But these are the big offenders that we will see and things that you need to know what these common pests look like. The Missouri publication that I referenced is up on the web, and it has some extras on there, some extra pests that you will see in the lawn. But I really wanted to cover these major offenders so we could talk about them and look at the main ones we find. We will find other things that will cause problems, but these are the big ones that are the biggest pain. So any questions that you may have? I tried to be really kind of short, sweet, to the point, and very practical in trying to find these pests. But those little tests, such as the can test or the test with the soap water or the pyrethrins, works really well. And then you can count, pulling back damaged turf to count the grubs. And then looking at the rasters, for instance, to find out exactly which grub it is, which beetle it matches up to, will help. And there are times when you check for grubs, you will see 4 different types of grub. They're not all the same. They're not all June bugs, but they're out there. No lawn will be totally free of every insect pest. We will always have these somewhere in the lawn. It's whether we have enough of them to do the damage. So if we think in a very common sense, we will be okay. The one downside to using 7 is that it can impact our earthworm population. But remember, we're using this only as a break in the case of emergency, and we're not using it on a regular basis. So there are times when we have to get those treated. And yes, that may do some damage to the earthworm population for a while, but if we're not putting them on a regular basis, we're getting the job done without too much damage.
Thank you.
Dave, have you heard of these jumping earthworms?
Jumping earthworms.
I think that's what they were called. They came from Africa and they're invading the US now.
I haven't, but I can definitely look it up for you. I have not. We have to remember when we have a lot of international commerce where we do bring things in on accident. We have things brought here on purpose too. So I can look, I can sure look that information up. I do have a question here. Can we talk about Japanese beetles? Can we talk a little bit more about Japanese beetles? I spend my summer picking them off on my roses and beans and putting them in buckets of soap water. A harder time on my fruit trees. And so the Japanese beetle, what you can do is you can take an empty milk jug and you can cut a window on the side opposite of your handle. So you have your handle on this side. So it's this side of the milk jug, cut a window open halfway up, put in a really ripe banana or an overly ripe apple and add cider vinegar in there and hang it. And as that gets warm and as that rots, that releases a pheromone that attracts Japanese beetles, green June bugs, all that, and they'll fall in there naturally as a trap. I would not recommend buying a Japanese beetle trap because you will end up with way more Japanese beetles coming to your place because you have that pheromone trap out than what you would have naturally occurring. So beware. And then you have a whole bunch of them show up. So they will attract, and then you end up with way more in your landscape than when you originally had a few. So that milk jug with the overly ripened fruit that's going to rot in the sun And yes, it's going to stink because it's going to, that vinegary, openly ripe fruit smell definitely is going to attract them. But that helps keep them off the fruit trees without using contact insecticides.
Typically, how many of those milk carrots do you have?
I would put a couple and remember where your wind patterns are. So if you're downwind or upwind and where the wind is going to come. So usually here, the wind is on the south side. So you want that scent to be picked up by the wind, wherever the wind comes from your direction. So
The window would face the wind.
yeah, you want it so it picks it up and carries it. So we have, let's go and share the art. Let's go to sharing screen and I can look at jumping worms and find them.
I found them. I found a bunch here.
So I'm going to end my,
Extensions too. Penn State, Grinnell,
so they're out there.
Maryland.
So we're going to go. Remember, I do not know everything. There is no way I know everything.
But now you do.
Oh, I don't know.
New species that have found.
Yes, here we go. This is from, from Cornell Extension, which is always a great source of information. I respect Cornell with their gardening and their landscaping work. Okay, non-native, European and Asian invasives. They're altering the soil structure and chemistry of forests. The Asian jumping worms are a relatively new invasive species as they rapidly spread across the US. They can be found in the Southeast. So basically they're moving their way across. Asian jumping worms devour organic matter more rapidly than their European counterparts, stripping forests of their critical layer of seedlings and wildflowers. Jumping worms grow twice as fast, reproduce more quickly, and can infest soils in high densities. So that's really interesting. So they're very aggressive in their growth. I'm looking at this. Are an annual species, so the adults die after the first freeze. So thankfully not something that would overwinter very easy. But the cocoons, which are about the size of a mustard seed, will survive in the winter and will hatch. So they do hatch because they're more aggressive than their, and populations grow faster than common European earthworms. They may outcompete existing worm populations. So one telltale sign of infestation is a very uniform granular soil created from worm castings. So you'd see a lot of worm castings, but we got to make sure that we are doing correct ID of these worms and not just say, oh, I've got them. Maybe you have a heavy European worm infestation versus these jumping Asian ones. But send us pictures, see what you think. One also will tell us these worms can reach 6 inches in length and are much more active than European night crawlers. They can be found on the soil surface and leaf litter, making them easy to find. Whereas our night crawlers are soil dwellers, deep dwellers. These are going to be found on the surface, so that's one telltale sign. They can live anywhere from urban parks and suburban backyards to rural forests. So they definitely are a potential problem. They have a very prominent band around their body. So you will see in this picture has a very prominent white band here. And that's where the cocoon is produced. So
give any type of a treatment,
I'm scrolling down.
treating for them?
Okay, so things how to control the spread. Okay, so do not buy or use jumping worms for bait, compost, or gardening. And when purchasing bulk compost, make sure you have a reputable source, of course, that's went through the hot treatment, the heat treatment. Check for jumping worms and using a mustard pour. It will not hurt your plants. a gallon of water with 1/3 cup of ground yellow mustard and pour into the soil. This will drive away any worms to the surface where you can easily remove them. So that is a good non-chemical way. It's a chemical, but a non-toxic way. So it's 1/3 cup of ground mustard to a gallon of water. If you see those, where you see those bands and they're up on the surface and they're long and they're very aggressive. So that's one thing you can do. So that's handpick and destroy by bagging. A lot of them will die in the sun. That's right. Think about all the worms that come up after the rain that end up on the sidewalk. And in a few minutes, they're usually baked down. So abrasive materials such as biochar, diatomaceous earth, because diatomaceous earth is also used in controlling of the hornworm, tomato hornworm. It rips them apart. That'll work as well. That's another one. So you can put that into infested soils, but also that mustard treatment with the water will help too. So not bad on treatment, but I've heard people talk about it, but I've never read up on it. So I apologize. They're found in Madison, Wisconsin about 4 years ago, and they do jump when touched. So, they could have been brought, and knowing our situation, they were probably brought in here on accident and they've taken off. So then they populate. So then that's why this is an article that was referring to studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and some departments in the Wisconsin government. So that makes sense, doesn't it? So this is a Cornell publication, but it does talk about Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So that's where the infestation started, somewhere where something was let loose potentially, and then it populated and took off. So any other questions? Kind of like the looping motion of the armyworm larva. How they loop, and in this case, they're jumping. They're real jumpy. So that's good to know. That's good to know the behavior of these things. But no, I could not tell you about that. So thank you for asking. And that's why we go and we look this stuff up. So put our research skills to work on extension materials. Any other questions? I'm going to go to our schedule here.
How do I possess in New York?
Yes, that's why they're very, very picky about having these non-native, we talk about these exotics, and that's why we try to control exotics, because in this case, something got out of control and it populated, and it's going to mess up the balance, obviously, in the ecosystem. So we need to get those under control. So next week, we're going to talk about common lawn disorders. So we talked about the insect pests, but now we're going to talk about we're going to talk about some diseases. We're going to talk about some problems that are environmental problems that will show up. So they're non-chemical, non-pest, non-disease related. So they're environmental stressors or things that show up. And so we'll talk through those as well, because it's so simple. People want to do something and they go and they always reach for the chemical. But remember, when we look at integrated pest management, the chemical treatment is always break in the case of emergency at the end. Let's get it identified first. Let's find out what it is. Let's see the nature of the problem and then treat it. And we very well may not need a chemical treatment. So that's why when people call, it's like, I need something to spray for this. Let's find out what it is first. That's always the first step in integrated pest management and honing your skills in your toolbox. So we'll talk about those common disorders that we see that are a major pain. And so I've been working with a homeowner on a new construction. And so there are construction related problems to lawns. And that will show up and people will think it's something else. So we'll delve into those things next week. But I will put up some more quizzes. My schedule is regulated itself out with any big events, so I can write quizzes. We'll do some quiz review at the next class, so I will post quizzes and let you all know. And we'll do the lawn disorders to help you out. So that will be very beneficial. And then April 26th is my colleague from Scotts Bluff, Gary Stone, and he's going to talk about the different types and classes of herbicides and how they work, because not every herbicide works the same way. And so we want to pair the herbicide, the class of herbicide or the type of herbicide with the need of the controls. So remember, this isn't ranch dressing where we just slather it on. We want to make sure we're using the right product if we're going to use a pesticide with the right target, if it's a weed or if it's something else. So any more questions?
Does anybody make just strictly a insecticide type fertilizer to put on your yard to treat your common pests that doesn't have a weed control or?
The question is, are there products that are specifically for insect control, but not weeds that you can put down in the lawn? And the answer is yes. So you will find those that are separate. We do see lots of combination products. And so you're right. They do combination products with the weed control as well as the insect control, but you can buy separate. So there's all different kinds of combinations. The biggest thing and one of our limitations in Western Nebraska is the variety of choice locally. So, but there are specific combinations that are just for insects and nothing else.
So is it better to get it from the local garden house or rather than a Menards, Walmart?
The biggest thing is to know the active ingredient. The question is it better to buy from a local business or just buy something from the Walmarts or the Menards of the world? And the answer is it does not matter as long as you know that you're using the right product that you need. It's always good to support your local businesses. So if you can support a local business and it's the right product, absolutely. If that's something that is important to you, I try to support the local business. But it's also a matter of price because there can be a price difference too. And because of sheer mass purchasing power. So the sandburrs, did we miss the time to spray sandburrs? Question. So what we need to do is we need to get our soil thermometers out and we need to be testing our soils. And we need to be right at 51, 52 degrees Fahrenheit for a week. And so that's really important for us to look at. And so since that question was brought up, we will look it up right now, what our soils look like. So here's the crop watch soil. Remember, we are going to look for the bare, we're going to go for the 4-inch sample. We're going to go for the weekly average. And so Shane, you're down in Chase County. And so looks like right now on our 4-inch data for a week, we are getting close. We're getting closer. We're at 45, 47, 45. But for you to truly know in your space, it's good to get that soil thermometer and test it. So remember, when we test soil temperatures, we are applying that soil temperature test at the same time of day, in the same location, at the same 4-inch depth, and waiting 10 minutes for the thermometer to calibrate and then take your reading. So we are still shy of that according to this map. But remember, 51 to 52 degrees Fahrenheit for a week. So we're not quite there. But based off of the data we have the ability to plant potatoes. My gosh. So the minimum temperature is, our minimum temperature is 40 degrees for planting potatoes. So you can plant potatoes, onions, peas, lettuce, those crops. So
Yeah, after I water for a week.
I watered my onion, the area where I'm going to do my onion patch. So hopefully this week I'll get that planted. So
Are beets a good thing to plant now?
we need a little bit warmer time. Yeah. You can use a product called Halts, Halts, and the chemical name is pendimethalin. So let me send this. And it works pretty good. It cleans up a lot of different problems. You're right. Thank you for looking up and asking about the soil temperature. Pendimethalin is the chemical name, and it's really pretty late to be doing any pruning of fruit trees now. So that should have been done earlier because buds are breaking. I had a question about if it's too late to prune fruit trees, and my answer would be yes. You can plant, you can put potatoes with the eyes. You can plant those potatoes with the eyes. You need to cut them. You need to let them heal or coarsen over where you cut, and then implant them. So in a day or two, let that kind of produce a scab, and then plant your seed potatoes. You need at least, preferably 2 eyes. Fruit trees should not be pruned in the fall. Only the dead and the dying can be taken out. So it's best to do when it's dormant. The next question is, would it be okay to plant cabbage and kale, celery? Yes, you can plant those crops and make sure you give them some protection, like a wall of water or a milk jug over the top. It's probably too late to do seedlings. So if you haven't started your tomatoes, you need to probably purchase those. So when we do tomatoes, you think of the average last frost. So roughly think of middle May, and then you need to count back 9 weeks. And that's when tomatoes should have been started. So all these days sneak up on you. It may feel like spring, but we have to start doing this stuff really in the winter to be ready for spring. So it does catch you. It seems a little counterintuitive, but it does make sense. Because I bought some seed on some tomatoes, and one's called a Hungarian heart tomato, and it is an indeterminate creature, which will be a fun one to grow, but it's really going to push our frost date. So I hope it produces. So I hope the soils are warm and we don't have an early freeze. Otherwise, I'm out of luck. But it'll be a fun one to try. See what happens. Any other questions for tonight? I'm letting y'all out a little early tonight, but we covered a lot of things. So if you have any questions, if you need any handouts, we've been posting the handouts. I'm going to get your quizzes posted. I'm also going to be sending out your self-paced classes for your new master gardeners. If you have not received your brand new Master Gardener book, your books are here. So send me an email or a text and we will get books to you. I have a meeting with the horticulture group tomorrow, and I have been told that shirts are not ready, but hopefully at the end of the month they will be. And I have a Master Gardener heading to Lincoln to hopefully pick those up. So we're really good about that. So anything else? If not, we'll just finish up for tonight and finish the recording. And everyone have a great evening. See you next week on the lawn disorders.